When twin sister swap there. The house on Maple Hollow Road had always been known as the place where everything came in pairs. Two brothers, two wives, two identical sisters, two identical lives. From the outside, it looked perfect. The property stood on a quiet wooded edge of a small Oregon town where fog lingered low in the mornings and the nights carried the slow hush of pine trees. The house itself was large but old, the kind of place built with deep wooden porches and wide hallways that carried echoes farther than expected. Inside that house lived the Holbrook brothers. The elder brother, Nathan Holbrook, had always carried the calm gravity of someone who felt responsible for the world around him. Tall, steady, thoughtful, he was the kind of man who fixed broken hinges before anyone asked and remembered birthdays without reminders. The younger brother, Lucas Holbrook, was different in ways that felt almost invisible but mattered deeply. Lucas moved through life with an easier rhythm, quicker smiles, quicker risks, and the strange confidence of someone who believed problems would eventually solve themselves. Despite the differences, the brothers shared something that few people ever experienced. They had married twin sisters. The sisters were Amelia Carter and Lillian Carter. To strangers, they were nearly impossible to tell apart. Same dark hair falling in soft waves, same pale green eyes that caught sunlight like glass, same delicate smile that seemed almost shy. But to the people who knew them, the differences were obvious. Amelia, the elder twin, carried a quiet maturity. She moved through rooms slowly, thoughtfully, noticing details others missed. Her voice was softer, her laughter rarer but warmer. Lillian, the younger twin, lived with more fire in her heart. She laughed easily, spoke quickly, and carried an energy that could fill a room before anyone realized it had changed. Nathan married Amelia. Lucas married Lillian. For 2 years, the four of them lived together in the large Holbrook house. At first, it had been a practical decision. Nathan had inherited the property from their parents. Lucas had just started his architecture firm and needed time to stabilize his finances. The sisters had grown up inseparable and saw no reason to separate now. So the house became something unusual. 2 couples living under one roof. 4 people sharing dinners, holidays, long evenings on the porch, and the slow rhythm of small-town life. It felt almost like a strange little kingdom built on trust. Yet, even in the earliest days, there were small things that no one paid attention to. Nathan sometimes noticed the way Lillian looked at him. It was never inappropriate, never obvious, just a moment too long, a smile that lingered half a second beyond comfort, a gaze that seemed curious in a way he couldn't quite explain. He always dismissed it. They were family. Lucas sometimes joked that the twins could swap places and nobody would know. At dinner one night, months earlier, the comment had sparked laughter. The idea seemed harmless, a playful thought. The twins had leaned into it, teasing the brothers with mock seriousness. Both sisters had spent their entire lives being mistaken for each other. Teachers had mixed them up in school, friends had failed to tell them apart, even their parents sometimes hesitated. Nathan and Lucas always insisted they could tell the difference instantly. Nathan knew Amelia by the calmness in her eyes. Lucas recognized Lillian by the restless energy in her movements. The joke faded, like most dinner jokes did, but somewhere in the quiet spaces of that house, the idea lingered longer than anyone realized. Autumn arrived early that year. Cold winds moved through the pine forests, and the evenings grew darker sooner than expected. One Saturday night, the four of them hosted a small gathering, just a few friends, some wine, music playing low in the living room while rain tapped softly against the windows. The night stretched comfortably. Laughter filled the house. At some point, someone mentioned the old joke again, the twin switch. Everyone laughed again. The idea sounded even funnier after several glasses of wine. The house felt warm. The storm outside made everything inside feel more private. Amelia and Lillian exchanged a look, one of those silent twin conversations that happened so naturally no one questioned it. Later that night, the party ended and the guests left. Rain continued to fall in slow, steady sheets across the forest. The house grew quiet. The plan formed quickly between the sisters. It felt harmless, just a small test, a little prank to see if their husbands truly knew them as well as they believed. For a moment, it felt almost childish, but also exciting. The idea carried the thrill of mischief without danger. At least, that's how it seemed. Upstairs, the house had 2 bedrooms on opposite sides of the hallway. Nathan and Amelia's room faced the back forest. Lucas and Lillian's room overlooked the driveway. The hallway light dimmed. The sisters moved silently through the darkness. The swap took only seconds. No one else knew, no one suspected. In the dim quiet of the night, identities blurred just enough for a moment of harmless fun. But something unexpected happened, something no one had planned. Nathan had always been a man who kept emotional distance, even in love. He loved Amelia deeply, but his affection carried restraint, discipline, patience. Lillian had always noticed that. She had always wondered what it would feel like to cross that invisible line. And in the darkness of that room, for a few fragile moments, that line disappeared. Nathan believed he was holding his wife. Lillian knew he was not. The silence of the night allowed emotions to surface that had never been spoken. Hidden feelings drifted into the space between them, a closeness formed that neither had ever allowed themselves to imagine before. Outside, rain struck the roof in soft, rhythmic waves. Inside the room, the world seemed to narrow to quiet breathing and warm darkness. Time passed without measurement. The moment was never meant to exist, but once it began, it did not stop quickly enough. By the time the truth quietly settled into Nathan's mind through small details only he would notice, the rhythm of breathing, the subtle difference in touch, the faint, unfamiliar perfume, the moment had already crossed a boundary that could not be undone. Shock arrived like cold water. Confusion followed, then silence. Nathan realized the truth. It was not Amelia beside him, it was Lillian, his younger brother's wife. The room felt suddenly too small, but outside the door, the hallway remained quiet. In the other bedroom, Lucas slept peacefully beside Amelia, unaware of the invisible shift that had occurred inside the house. The sisters never spoke about what had happened that night. They believed the prank had worked. They believed the swap had gone unnoticed. Morning arrived normally. Breakfast happened. Coffee steamed in the kitchen. No one mentioned anything. Nathan carried the knowledge alone. He convinced himself it had been an accident, a foolish moment created by a harmless joke, something that should never be spoken aloud. Weeks passed. Life returned to its normal rhythm. Winter approached. Then something changed. Lillian began to feel tired more often. Small things at first, morning nausea, dizziness, fatigue, the kind of symptoms that quietly rearrange a household when no one is looking. A doctor's appointment confirmed the news. Lillian was pregnant. The house filled with joy. Lucas felt overwhelmed with excitement. Amelia hugged her sister with tears in her eyes. Nathan smiled, but inside his chest something tightened like a knot that refused to loosen. Because deep down, hidden beneath months of silence, a question had begun to grow. And questions like that rarely stay buried forever. The winter that followed the announcement of Lillian's pregnancy changed the rhythm of the house on Maple Hollow Road in quiet but permanent ways. Pregnancy has a strange ability to reshape ordinary days. The mornings became slower, the kitchen filled with the smell of herbal tea instead of strong coffee. The living room couch slowly turned into Lillian's favorite resting place, wrapped in soft blankets while snow drifted against the tall windows of the house. Lucas embraced the coming fatherhood with a kind of boyish excitement that no one had expected from him. He read parenting books late into the night. He researched cribs, strollers, and paint colors for the nursery. He even began sketching designs for a small treehouse in the backyard someday far in the future, long before the child would be old enough to climb its ladder. Nathan watched all of it with a complicated mix of happiness and quiet unease. He had always loved his younger brother with a deep protective loyalty. Lucas had been the child who needed guidance, the one who jumped into life with reckless enthusiasm while Nathan carefully built stability around him. Seeing Lucas become a father filled Nathan with pride. But beneath that pride, something colder existed. A memory. A single night that Nathan had never allowed himself to examine too closely. That night had remained buried in the deepest part of his mind. He treated it like a mistake that could be erased by silence, like something that had existed only because of confusion and darkness and a foolish prank that had gone too far. The sisters had never spoken about the swap again. To them, it had remained nothing more than a joke. Nathan had watched carefully afterward, searching their faces for any sign of awareness. But both Amelia and Lillian behaved exactly the same as they always had. It seemed clear that neither of them knew what had truly happened. And so, Nathan kept the secret. Months passed. The house slowly transformed into a place preparing for new life. A spare room upstairs became the nursery. Lucas painted the walls a soft shade of pale blue, while Lillian sat nearby in a chair, offering suggestions and laughing whenever he got paint on his hands. Amelia helped assemble furniture and fold tiny clothes that seemed impossibly small. Nathan helped when asked, but most of the time he stayed slightly distant, focusing on work or repairs around the property. No one questioned it. Nathan had always been a quieter man. But occasionally, when Lillian thought no one was watching, she glanced toward him with an expression that carried something unspoken. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't fear. It was something softer, something complicated. A memory, perhaps. But she never mentioned the night either. Spring arrived slowly in the forests around Maple Hollow Road. The snow melted into small streams that ran between the trees, and the air filled with the scent of damp earth and new leaves. Lillian's pregnancy reached its final weeks. The house became tense with anticipation. Lucas had packed and repacked a hospital bag 3 times. Amelia had organized every cabinet in the kitchen. Nathan found himself fixing things that were not broken just to keep his hands busy. Then, one quiet night in late April, the moment finally came. Lillian went into labor. Lucas drove them to the hospital through dark, winding roads, while Nathan and Amelia followed in a second car. The hours that followed blurred together in long stretches of waiting. Hospitals always seemed to exist outside normal time. Nathan spent most of the night sitting in a chair in the hallway, staring at the floor while fluorescent lights hummed softly above him. Occasionally, Amelia sat beside him, her hand resting gently over his. Lucas remained inside the delivery room. Near dawn, the doctor finally appeared with a tired but satisfied smile. The baby had arrived safely. A boy. Lucas's laughter echoed through the hallway like sunlight breaking through clouds. Nathan stood slowly as relief washed through the room. When they finally entered the hospital room, Lillian looked exhausted but radiant in the pale morning light. In her arms rested a small bundle wrapped in white blankets. Lucas stood beside her with tears still visible in his eyes. Nathan stepped closer. He looked down at the child, and in that moment, something inside him shifted. The baby's eyes were closed, his face still red and wrinkled with new life, his tiny fingers curled gently against the blanket. Nothing seemed unusual, nothing seemed strange, and yet Nathan felt a strange chill pass through his chest. It wasn't a thought, it wasn't even a suspicion, just a small, quiet feeling that something about the moment felt heavier than it should. The baby was named Ethan Halbrook. Life quickly reorganized itself around the child. Sleep schedules changed, the house filled with the soft sounds of crying, rocking chairs, lullabies, and tired laughter. Lucas embraced fatherhood completely. He carried Ethan everywhere, proudly introducing him to neighbors and friends. Amelia moved through the early months with the gentle focus of a mother discovering a new world. Amelia helped constantly, often staying up late at night to assist with feeding or soothing the baby when Lillian needed rest. Nathan watched from the edges of the new family routine. He cared for Ethan. He played with him when he grew old enough to smile and reach for fingers. But every now and then, Nathan found himself studying the child's face with an attention that bordered on obsession. The human mind searches for patterns. It notices small similarities even when none truly exist. Nathan told himself that was all he was doing, looking for patterns. Months turned into years. Ethan grew into a bright, energetic little boy. His laughter filled the house just as Lucas had imagined. By the age of 4, he was already running through the backyard, climbing trees and asking endless questions about the world around him. The Halbrook house felt more alive than it ever had before. To anyone looking from the outside, the family seemed perfect. But Nathan's quiet observations never fully stopped. Ethan had inherited dark hair like many people in the family. That meant nothing. But his eyes carried a shade of deep gray that reminded Nathan strangely of his own father. That also meant nothing. Children inherit traits from distant relatives all the time. Nathan knew this. Still, the small thoughts returned occasionally. They never became accusations. They never turned into certainty. Just quiet questions that he quickly pushed aside. Years continued to move forward. 7 years passed. Ethan grew into a curious, intelligent child with Lucas's enthusiasm and Lillian's bright laughter. Nathan had almost succeeded in burying the memory of that night completely. Almost. Then one autumn afternoon, something unexpected happened. Nathan visited a medical clinic for a routine checkup. The appointment should have been ordinary, just another piece of adult responsibility handled quickly before returning to work. But the doctor asked a simple question that changed everything. Nathan and Amelia had been married nearly 10 years by then. They had never had children. At first, they had not worried about it. Life had been busy. Work had demanded attention. The house had been full of activity even without their own child. But eventually, the question became unavoidable. Why hadn't they started a family? The doctor recommended some simple medical tests. Nothing serious, just precaution. Nathan agreed without much thought. Weeks later, he returned for the results. The doctor's office felt strangely quiet that afternoon. The physician spoke carefully, using calm professional language. The results showed a condition that Nathan had never expected to hear, a condition that had existed his entire life without his knowledge. Nathan was infertile, not partially, not temporarily, completely. The doctor explained it gently. Nathan would never be able to father a child naturally. The words seemed to echo inside the room long after they were spoken. Nathan listened without reacting. He nodded politely. He asked a few calm questions. Then he left the clinic and drove home through the falling leaves of early autumn. His mind replayed the doctor's words again and again. Never. Not possible. Impossible. By the time Nathan reached Maple Hollow Road, a terrible realization had begun forming in the back of his mind, a realization connected to a memory he had spent 7 years trying to forget. Inside the house, Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing pictures with colored pencils. Lucas stood nearby preparing dinner, while Lillian laughed softly at something the boy had said. Amelia was watering plants near the window. The scene looked exactly like the peaceful family life Nathan had always protected. But now, standing in the doorway, Nathan felt the world tilt slightly beneath his feet. Because if the doctor was right, if Nathan truly could never become a father, then one impossible question refused to stay silent any longer. Nathan looked at Ethan. The boy lifted his head and smiled. For the first time in 7 years, Nathan allowed the memory of that single night to return fully. The darkness, the silence, the mistaken identity, and the moment when he realized too late who had truly been beside him. A cold wave of realization moved slowly through Nathan's chest, because suddenly the timeline felt far too perfect. 7 years, 1 night, 1 secret, and 1 child who had grown up believing another man was his father. The house remained filled with laughter that evening, but Nathan no longer heard it the same way. The secret he had buried for nearly a decade had finally found its way back to the surface, and this time it refused to disappear.
The boy who carried my eyes. The human mind has a strange way of protecting itself from uncomfortable truths. For years, Nathan Halbrook had buried a memory so deeply that it had almost dissolved into something unreal. It had become a shadow rather than an event, a quiet piece of the past that he could pretend had never happened. But the doctor's words had broken that fragile illusion. Infertile. The word followed him home like an echo that refused to fade. That evening, the Halbrook house looked exactly the same as it had every other night for the past 7 years. Lucas stood at the stove preparing dinner, humming softly while stirring a pan. Lillian moved around the kitchen arranging plates. Amelia watered the plants near the windows. Ethan sat at the table drawing pictures of forests and mountains with the fierce concentration only children seem capable of. The scene looked warm, comfortable, safe. Yet Nathan suddenly felt like he was standing inside a place that no longer belonged to him. His eyes kept returning to the boy at the table. Ethan's dark hair fell slightly over his forehead as he bent over the paper. Every few seconds, he pushed it back in a quick, unconscious movement. Nathan had done that same gesture his entire life. The thought struck him with quiet force. He immediately tried to dismiss it. Children often copy the habits of adults around them. Ethan had grown up watching both brothers every day. Small behaviors could easily transfer without meaning anything deeper. Nathan told himself that, but once the thought had formed, it refused to disappear. Over the next few weeks, Nathan found himself observing Ethan more carefully than he ever had before. Not openly, not in a way anyone else would notice, just small moments, quick glances, silent comparisons. Ethan's laughter sounded bright and full, much like Lucas's had always been. His energy came from Lucas as well. The boy seemed to carry the same restless curiosity that had defined Lucas's childhood. But there were other things too. Ethan's eyes held a deeper gray tone that no one else in the house shared. Nathan had inherited those same eyes from his father. At first, Nathan convinced himself it was coincidence. Genetics could skip generations, family traits could appear unexpectedly. The explanation sounded reasonable enough. Yet something inside him had already begun connecting pieces he could no longer separate. One quiet afternoon, Nathan returned home earlier than usual from work. The house was peaceful. Amelia had gone grocery shopping. Lucas was still at the architecture office. Inside the living room, Lillian sat on the floor with Ethan while helping him build an elaborate castle out of wooden blocks. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting warm patterns across the carpet. Nathan paused in the hallway for a moment, watching them without announcing his presence. Lillian's expression softened as she helped Ethan place the final tower on top of the castle walls. The look on her face carried something deeper than simple happiness. Pride, affection, a quiet kind of love that filled the entire room. For a brief moment, Nathan wondered if he had allowed his mind to wander too far into suspicion. Maybe the doctor's diagnosis had simply shaken him more than he realized. Maybe the memory of that night meant nothing at all. Then Ethan suddenly looked up from the blocks. His gray eyes met Nathan's across the room. For a strange second, neither of them moved. Nathan felt a subtle jolt inside his chest. The resemblance wasn't obvious enough for strangers to notice, but now that Nathan was searching for it, the similarities felt difficult to ignore. Ethan smiled and waved excitedly. Nathan forced himself to smile back. Lillian turned slightly when she noticed Ethan's reaction. Her eyes landed on Nathan. For a moment, the room felt oddly quiet. Nathan expected her to greet him normally, the way she always did, but instead, something changed in her expression. It was subtle, almost invisible, yet Nathan noticed it instantly. Lillian looked at him the way someone looks at a memory they had hoped would stay buried. Just for a second, then the expression vanished, and she smiled casually as if nothing had happened. Nathan stepped into the room. The moment dissolved, but something inside him had shifted. Over the next several days, Nathan began replaying that brief expression in his mind again and again. He had seen many emotions in people over the course of his life: fear, guilt, regret. What he had seen in Lillian's eyes carried traces of all three. That realization unsettled him more than anything else, because if Lillian remembered that night the way he did, then the secret was not his alone. Nathan found himself drifting into deeper thought during the quiet hours of the night. The timeline continued to circle inside his mind.
7 years earlier. The prank, the darkness, the moment of realization that came too late.
Then months later, Lillian's pregnancy. The pieces lined up too perfectly. Nathan had never allowed himself to examine the possibility seriously before, but now he could not stop. Still, one truth remained unavoidable. Nathan had no proof. Without proof, the entire idea remained nothing more than suspicion built on an old memory and a medical report. Accusing his own brother's wife would destroy the family instantly. Even raising the question could shatter everything the four of them had built together. Nathan knew that, so he kept the thoughts locked inside his mind. Life inside the Holbrook house continued as normal on the surface. Dinner conversations, weekend outings, Lucas helping Ethan with school projects, Amelia tending to the garden behind the house. But Nathan's internal world had changed completely. He noticed details he had never paid attention to before. The way Lillian occasionally watched him when she believed no one else was looking. The way Ethan sometimes mirrored Nathan's small habits without realizing it. The way Amelia remained blissfully unaware of the quiet tension that had begun forming between the other two. One evening, Nathan found himself alone in the study, sorting through old family photographs stored in boxes on a high shelf. The photographs covered decades of Holbrook family history. Parents, grandparents, childhood birthdays, fishing trips. Nathan flipped through them slowly. Then he paused. One photo showed Nathan at age 8 standing beside his father near a lake. His father had the same calm eyes, the same sharp jawline, the same subtle crease that formed near the left eyebrow when concentrating. Nathan stared at the picture for a long time. Then a new thought entered his mind, a thought that made his chest tighten. What if Ethan inherited those same features, not because of distant genetics, but because they shared something far more direct? Nathan closed the box quickly. The idea felt too heavy to hold for long. Days later, another moment unsettled him even more. It happened during a small-town festival in early autumn. The entire family walked through rows of handmade crafts and food vendors. Music drifted through the air. Ethan ran ahead excitedly, pointing at bright balloons and carnival games. Lucas laughed while chasing after him. Nathan and Lillian walked a few steps behind the others. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan tripped slightly while running across a patch of uneven grass. Nathan instinctively moved forward to steady him before Lucas could react. The gesture happened naturally, automatically. Nathan placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder to help him regain balance. For a brief moment, Ethan looked up at him with complete trust. Lillian watched the interaction from a short distance away. Nathan noticed her expression again, that same mixture of emotions, recognition, fear, something deeper. Later that night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, Nathan stood alone on the back porch. The forest behind the house stretched into darkness. Wind moved softly through the tall pines. Footsteps approached quietly from behind. Nathan didn't turn around immediately. He already knew who it was. Lillian stopped a few feet away from him. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried 7 years of unspoken history. Nathan felt the weight of the question pressing against his chest, but he still could not bring himself to say it. Because once spoken, the truth would change everything forever. And somewhere inside him, a part of Nathan still hoped that the truth might somehow be different from what he feared. Yet deep down, he already sensed that the past was slowly rising back to the surface. And when it finally did, the quiet life inside the Holbrook house might never be the same again. The test results would take several weeks. During that time, Nathan found himself living in a strange emotional limbo. Part of him desperately hoped the results would prove his suspicions wrong. Another part of him feared they would confirm exactly what he already believed. Life inside the house continued normally, at least on the surface. But something about Lillian's behavior began changing slowly as the days passed. She seemed more distant, more thoughtful. Occasionally, Nathan caught her watching him in moments when she thought he was distracted. Her eyes carried a quiet sadness that had not been there before. It was as if she sensed that something was coming, something inevitable. One evening, Amelia suggested that the 4 adults spend time together after Ethan had gone to bed. They gathered in the living room with glasses of wine and soft music playing in the background. Lucas talked enthusiastically about a new project his firm had secured. Amelia listened with interest, asking questions and offering encouragement. Nathan remained quiet. Lillian spoke very little. At one point, Lucas laughed and placed an arm around her shoulders. The gesture looked natural and affectionate, but Nathan noticed that Lillian's smile appeared slightly forced. Later that night, after everyone had gone to their rooms, Nathan stepped outside onto the back porch again. The air carried the cool scent of early winter. The forest behind the house stood dark and still beneath the moonlight. He leaned against the wooden railing, trying to quiet the constant movement of thoughts inside his mind. Footsteps approached quietly from behind him. Nathan did not turn around this time. He already knew who it was. Lillian stopped beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt different tonight, heavier. Finally, Lillian looked out toward the trees. Her voice never came, but something about her posture suggested that words were fighting their way to the surface. Nathan felt the same pressure building inside his chest. 7 years of silence had stretched this moment beyond its limit, yet neither of them seemed capable of breaking it. Eventually, Lillian stepped away from the railing. Nathan glanced toward her. For a brief second, their eyes met, and in that moment, Nathan saw something unmistakable, a quiet acknowledgement, not spoken, not confessed, but present all the same. The next morning, Nathan received a notification from the testing company confirming that the samples had arrived at the laboratory. Results would be available soon. The waiting suddenly felt unbearable. Every ordinary moment inside the house now seemed charged with hidden meaning. Nathan found himself studying Ethan more closely than ever. The boy's laughter, his expressions, the way he furrowed his brow while concentrating on puzzles. Each small similarity felt like another piece of evidence that Nathan could no longer ignore. But until the test results arrived, none of it truly mattered. Speculation meant nothing. Only the truth would matter. One snowy afternoon, several weeks later, Nathan returned home from work to find a small package waiting on his desk in the study. The envelope bore the logo of the testing laboratory. Nathan stared at it for several seconds without touching it. His heart began beating faster. The answer he had been waiting for was now only a few pages away. Downstairs, he could hear Ethan laughing while Lucas helped him assemble a new model airplane. Amelia and Lillian were talking quietly in the kitchen. The sounds of family life drifted through the house exactly as they always had. Nathan sat down slowly in his chair. The envelope rested on the desk in front of him. He understood something in that moment with absolute clarity. Once he opened it, the life he had known for 7 years might disappear forever. Still, the question had already taken too much control over his mind. He needed the truth. Nathan finally reached for the envelope. His fingers slid beneath the seal. The paper opened with a soft tearing sound, and for the first time since that rainy night 7 years ago, the secret that had lived quietly inside the Halbrook house stood on the edge of being revealed. After the night on the porch, the quiet tension inside the Halbrook house no longer felt invisible. Nothing had been spoken, no accusations had been made, but something fragile had shifted between Nathan and Lillian. The silence they shared now carried awareness. For 7 years, they had both lived as if the past did not exist. They had moved through the same house, the same rooms, the same family gatherings without ever acknowledging what had happened on that rainy night long ago. Now that illusion had begun to crack. Nathan noticed it in the smallest details. Whenever their eyes met across a room, Lillian looked away more quickly than before. Sometimes she seemed nervous in ways that had never existed in the past. Other times, she watched Ethan with an intensity that almost felt protective, as if she were guarding him from something unseen. Nathan could not decide whether those behaviors meant guilt or fear, or perhaps something even more complicated. Meanwhile, Lucas remained completely unaware of the quiet storm building beneath the calm surface of his life. Lucas still laughed loudly at dinner. He still told stories about his architecture projects. He still treated Ethan as the center of his world. The boy adored him. To Ethan, Lucas was the father who carried him on his shoulders, helped him with homework, and built toy castles on the living room floor. Watching them together made Nathan feel a strange mixture of warmth and dread. Because if the truth was what he feared, then Lucas had unknowingly raised another man's child for 7 years. That thought alone carried the power to destroy everything. Nathan tried to convince himself that the suspicion might still be wrong. There were too many unknowns. Memories could be unreliable. Assumptions could mislead. He needed certainty. Weeks passed before Nathan finally made a decision that he had been avoiding since the day he left the doctor's office. He would find the truth, quietly, without anyone else knowing. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. One Saturday morning, Lucas left early for a construction site meeting while Amelia drove into town to help a friend prepare for a charity event. Lillian stayed home with Ethan. Nathan remained in his study, pretending to review paperwork. Through the window, he could see Ethan playing in the backyard, chasing leaves across the grass while Lillian watched from a garden chair. The scene looked peaceful, normal, but Nathan's mind was already moving toward a plan he had rehearsed many times. A simple DNA test could answer the question that had haunted him for weeks. Modern testing required very little: a hair sample, saliva, even a used toothbrush. Nathan hated the idea of taking something from Ethan without permission, but the alternative was continuing to live with a question that had already begun to consume him. Later that afternoon, Lillian brought Ethan inside after he had spent hours playing outdoors. The boy ran upstairs to his room while Lillian went into the kitchen to prepare lunch. Nathan moved quietly through the hallway. He paused outside Ethan's bedroom door. The room looked exactly like the bedroom of any curious 7-year-old boy. Toy cars scattered across the floor, a small bookshelf filled with adventure stories, drawings taped to the walls. Nathan stepped inside slowly. His heart beat harder than he expected. He wasn't sure why the moment felt so heavy, perhaps because the truth waiting on the other side of this decision could reshape every relationship in the house. On Ethan's desk sat a small plastic cup that held the boy's toothbrush. Nathan stood there for several seconds without moving. The silence inside the room felt unusually thick. Finally, he reached out and carefully wrapped the toothbrush in a clean handkerchief he had brought from his study. The action took only several seconds, but when it was done, Nathan felt as though he had crossed an invisible line. Nathan Halbrook held the envelope in his hands for a long time before he allowed himself to read what was inside. The study felt unusually quiet. Through the closed door, he could hear the distant sounds of the house continuing its ordinary life. Ethan's excited voice drifted faintly from the living room. Lucas laughed at something the boy said. The familiar rhythm of family life moved forward exactly as it always had. Yet inside the study, everything felt suspended. Nathan slowly unfolded the papers. The laboratory report contained several pages of technical information, graphs, and genetic markers that meant little at first glance. But near the bottom of the final page, one sentence had been printed in clear, unmistakable language. The probability of paternity was greater than 99.9%. Nathan stared at the line without moving. For several seconds, his mind refused to process the meaning. Then the realization settled into place with quiet finality. Ethan was his son. The truth that Nathan had feared and suspected for weeks was no longer speculation. It was fact. The room suddenly felt smaller. 7 years of memories rearranged themselves instantly inside Nathan's mind. Ethan's laughter, his gray eyes, the familiar gestures that Nathan had once dismissed as coincidence. Every moment now carried a different meaning. Downstairs, the boy who believed Lucas was his father was actually Nathan's child. The weight of that knowledge pressed heavily against his chest. Nathan folded the papers carefully and placed them back inside the envelope. He remained seated in the study for nearly an hour, staring silently at the desk while the house continued moving around him. Eventually, the door opened. Amelia stepped inside. Her expression carried the gentle curiosity she often showed when Nathan disappeared into his thoughts for too long. She walked toward him slowly. Nathan looked up. For a brief moment, he wondered what his life would look like if he told her the truth. The thought vanished almost immediately. Some truths destroy too many lives to ever be spoken aloud. Amelia placed a hand gently on his shoulder before leaving the room again. Nathan waited until the house grew quiet later that night. Lucas and Amelia had gone to bed. Ethan slept upstairs in his room. Only one light remained on in the kitchen. Nathan walked downstairs slowly. Lillian stood near the sink, staring out the window at the dark forest beyond the yard. She turned slightly when she heard his footsteps. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavier than it ever had before. Nathan placed the envelope on the kitchen table. Lillian's eyes moved toward it. Something in her expression changed immediately. Fear appeared there first, then recognition. She seemed to understand what the envelope represented without Nathan needing to explain it. Nathan watched her carefully. The truth no longer belonged only to memory or suspicion. It now existed on paper between them. Lillian's shoulders lowered slightly as if the weight she had carried for years had suddenly grown impossible to hold. Her eyes closed for a moment. Nathan realized something then that he had never fully considered before. She had been living with this secret too, perhaps even longer than he had. When Lillian opened her eyes again, there was no denial left in them, only exhaustion. Nathan understood her silence without needing words. The memory of that night returned to both of them in the quiet space of the kitchen. A foolish prank, darkness, mistaken identities, a moment that had been meant as harmless fun before crossing into something irreversible. Nathan had discovered the truth during that night, but Lillian had known from the very beginning. She had understood exactly what was happening, and afterward she had chosen silence, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Nathan suddenly saw the past through a different lens. Lillian had married Lucas. Lucas loved her deeply. Confessing the truth would have destroyed him. Then the pregnancy had come. By the time she realized what the child might mean, it had already been too late. The only path forward had been silence. 7 years of silence. 7 years of watching Ethan grow while hiding the truth from everyone around her. Nathan finally spoke the only sentence that mattered. Not aloud, just with his eyes resting on the envelope. Lillian's gaze followed his. The truth existed there between them now. Undeniable, unavoidable. She slowly lowered herself into a chair across the table. Nathan remained standing. Neither of them needed to say what they both already knew. Ethan was Nathan's son, but Ethan believed Lucas was his father, and Lucas loved him completely. The situation contained no easy answers. Nathan imagined what would happen if the truth came out. Lucas would feel betrayed by both of them. Amelia's heart would break. Ethan's entire sense of family would collapse overnight. The Halbrook house would never recover. Nathan felt the full weight of that reality pressing down on him. He thought about the boy sleeping upstairs. Ethan had grown up surrounded by love. He had 2 parents who cared for him deeply. Lucas had never treated him as anything less than his own child. In every meaningful way, Lucas had been Ethan's father. Nathan slowly reached forward and pushed the envelope toward Lillian. Her eyes widened slightly in confusion. Nathan looked at her with calm certainty. The choice he had made formed quietly but firmly in his mind. Some truths serve no purpose except destruction. The past could not be undone, but the future still depended on the decisions they made now. Lillian stared at the envelope for a long moment before understanding what Nathan was offering. A chance to keep the secret buried, to protect the fragile life they had built together. Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. Not relief, not happiness, something more complicated. Gratitude mixed with sorrow. Nathan stepped away from the table. Before leaving the kitchen, he paused once more. Upstairs, Ethan slept peacefully in his room, a boy growing up in a house filled with people who loved him. Nathan realized something important in that moment. Being a father was not only about blood, it was about presence, guidance, care. Lucas had already given Ethan all of those things. Nathan would not take that away. The secret would remain where it had lived for 7 years, hidden, unspoken, but never forgotten. Nathan walked upstairs slowly and paused outside Ethan's bedroom door. Through the small opening, he could see the boy sleeping peacefully beneath the blankets. Nathan stood there for a long time, watching, thinking. Then he quietly closed the door and returned to his own room. The house on Maple Hollow Road remained exactly the same as it had been the night before. 2 brothers, 2 wives, 1 child, and a secret that would likely live in the shadows of that house for the rest of their lives. Sometimes, the most difficult truth is not discovering the secret. Sometimes, the hardest choice is deciding that the world is better off not knowing it at all.